Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the RPA for Finance in Manufacturing webinar, brought to you by iOCO and Automation Anywhere. So thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nastasia Arendse, and I will be your host for the next hour or so. And because we want these webinars to be as interactive as possible, I'd like to encourage you to participate. If you have any questions or comments, please use the chat facility. And also, if you are on social media and you'd also like to use the event hashtag as you share your comments with your followers, the hashtag to use is iOCO RPA in accounts. And also remember that the recording will be made available online. If there's any parts that you missed and you want to go back to, we will have the recording emailed to you. So there are a lot of trends happening around the world that have shifted the focus and dynamics of the accounting profession. And according to research by McKinsey, a great number of CFOs have decided to increase their investment in technology due to COVID-19. And for years, organizations have been trying to find financial improvements that attempt to eliminate repetitive manual actions. And unfortunately, in the past, what they discovered is that even though they were implementing all of these improvements, they weren't able to deal with some of the core problems that existed in finance and in the accounting world. One of them at the time was how to get the data into the systems, and the second was how to close their financials at the end of the month. So we've got amazing speakers lined up for the next hour. We're going to be talking about a whole host of things, such as outlining the planning processes and strategies to achieve optimal results with learning and outcomes from real-world customers who have implemented RPA in accounts payable. Our two speakers are Johan du Preez, who is from iOCO, and we also a little bit later on are going to have Neil van Wijngaard. So just to intro our first speaker, that is Johan du Preez. He's the business development and automation head at iOCO. His role is designing solutions that encompass the entire digital ecosystem, driving innovation and thought leadership, and assisting customers to unlock the value of their digital investments in a cloud-first world. Johan previously worked at EOH as the business unit head, specializing in deploying Microsoft-based solutions to optimize and increase productivity. So without much further ado, I'd like to welcome to the virtual stage, Johan du Preez. Johan, over to you.
Thank you, Nastasia. As mentioned, yes, I have the privilege on a daily basis to help our customers really identify opportunities to optimize their business. And today I'm going to talk a bit about how do we transform finance in the manufacturing space by using automation to drive out value. So to start off with, I just want to set the tone a bit and position, what is automation and what do we talk about when we talk about automation, and then look at, what drives automation, etc. So starting out, the easiest is always to position what we are not talking about when we talk about automation and specifically robotics. So if we start at the left bottom there, we're not talking about industrial robots. That's a completely different topic. We're not talking about talking robots that you see in the sci-fi movies. And we're also not talking about a digital workforce that entirely replaces your human capital or your human workforce. Instead, it really is looking at how do we better equip our staff by really finding ways to provide them with additional virtual hands and feet and eyes so that they can operate more effectively and get more done in the same time span. So some of the benefits that usually gets derived from these type of initiatives would be enhancements in customer or vendor experience, improved process efficiencies, and therefore increases in productivity. In the right scenarios, if you need to show quick return on investments, with digitization initiatives, automation lends itself quite well to that. Increases in accuracy, so reduction of human error is also one of the core benefits that we can derive. A 24/7 workforce, so if we need to be able to act around the clock without necessarily having to tax our people to work during the night. And then employee engagement, so really making the lives of our employees better by taking away some of these frustrating, repetitive activities that they sometimes need to deal with. And that's really what we look at if, or what we talk about if we position automation as an enabler. Now, with that said, I think it's also quite important to keep in mind why you automate. And it's one of the things that, if this is not well understood, we see quite often in the market that, initiatives fail, they don't produce value because the teams don't necessarily consider why they are automating. You don't want to automate purely for the purpose of automation, but you need to rather keep in mind, what are these core drivers that drive your organization? In current days, I think cost saving or reduction really is a cornerstone driver for any organization. And it's probably one of those evergreen trends that will never disappear. So if cost saving is one of those drivers, we need to keep that in mind and ensure that we align to that. The risk reduction and governance and compliance, those two go quite close together. Inevitably, if risk is unmanaged or there's breaches in compliance, those two result in cost. So again, a financial lever that really affects those drivers. And then the last two, employee satisfaction and customer satisfaction, or supplier satisfaction in that case, has really risen up in the ranks that we've seen over the past 18 months or so. Employee satisfaction specifically because job security has gone down with the advent of the COVID pandemic, and people tend to be quite nervous. So if they are dissatisfied in their jobs, they tend to jump ship quite easily. So improving their work situation really helps us retain those good employees and keep them on board. And then customer or supplier satisfaction, obviously those relationships are really key in driving out business. So once you understand how to or why you are automating, I think another thing that's quite important to just understand is how to go about this. And the reason that we say it's important to understand why we are doing this is really to feed into this approach. We've seen quite a lot of success taking this approach, and we always advise customers to endeavor on automation initiatives in a similar form. So firstly, identify what it is that drives your automation initiative, and that could be a combination of different drivers like cost reduction, risk reduction, and revenue enhancement. Then we need to look at which use cases in our value chain supports those drivers. And in the finance space, that could be something like accounts receivable to help us drive down debtor days and improve our cash position, or supplier onboarding, ensuring that we go through that process efficiently and quickly. Only after we've identified these use cases and defined a business case that makes sense, do we then start looking at technology. And I'll chat a bit about the different technologies at play. But then we really go in and look at how do we solve this problem? Which Lego blocks do we pull together to solve it in the most efficient and effective way? And I think very importantly, we firmly believe that at the end of this process, we need to go back and measure the outcomes and ensure that we've actually met those targets that we set ourselves when we identified the use cases, so that we can tie it back to these business drivers. With that said, always keep in mind that an agile approach with taking small packets of work and driving out value tends to be the most effective in our experience. All right, so looking at the different technologies, I think it's also, technology-wise, it can be quite a daunting environment. There are so many technologies around these days. But when we look at automation, we actually make use of quite a few different technology elements. System integration, it's still part and parcel of, any automation initiative that we do. And that would really be connecting systems like your payroll system to your ERP, and having that tight integration to share data between the different systems and drive processes across the different silos. Computer vision, so that would really enable us to firstly read and understand documents. So invoices, as a good example, interpreting the document, extracting that data and feeding that into our workflow and robotics processes. It negates the need to have people sit and actually read and retype certain things. Apart from that, things like object recognition in video and imagery has also become quite prevalent and effective in today's world. The next two, probably the most applicable automation technologies, so workflow, and that really is the traditional digital process of pushing processes from activity to activity, coupled with RPA and robotics process automation really helps us execute those activities. So digitizing the process through workflow helps us push it through in a structured fashion, and robotics helps us execute those tasks within that process. And then lastly, looking at cognitive agents or digital assistants. And that, if you think, for lack of a better explanation, is really a little digital personal assistant that can help you do your job a lot better. And that could be in the form of intelligent chatbots, or even assisted or attended robotics bots that help you execute certain tasks. When we build all of these technologies together, that's really when we start driving towards intelligent automation and using technologies like AI to really drive processes effectively and intelligently. Okay, so with that context set, I guess it's always a good question is, why would we want to look at automation in the finance function? And these five reasons, I think, really encompasses some of the broad stroke benefits. So firstly, looking at increases in operational efficiency. We can streamline a lot of the manual processes that not only improves our operations, but it also helps us reduce cost if we need less people to act on certain process or sub-process streams. Time is always an important thing, so if we can improve the time we take to perform certain processes, it really helps us accelerate specific things. If you think about financial closes, or even processing accounts receivable as a good example. Strengthening governance in any governed function, I think that is always key. It's never an exciting topic, but it really is an important one that always remains relevant. So helping us tighten controls and improve accuracy within the function. Fostering innovation. If we provide our staff with the ability to take some time and think about how they can help us improve processes, we can really tap into that thinking and bring that innovation into the function. The way that we do that is we take away some of the mundane activities from them and free up some of their time so that they can start contributing more and more value to the function. And then I think lastly, empowering human capital. Again, taking away the mundane activities helps us elevate the function of our finance professionals to allow them to act more strategically. And for instance, engage in supplier management or supplier relationship management activities to really improve how we work with outside parties or other functions in the business. Now, having said that, any back office function, really leans itself well to automation, but I think finance is one of those that we can really add value throughout the entire value chain. If we start looking at something simple like the financial operations space, there's opportunities in accounts payable, accounts receivable, treasury, tax. moving through to GL close, looking at daily transaction entries, master data management. A lot of the admin heavy activities lends themselves extremely well to automation. And even moving up the chain, if we start looking at the more strategic functions around financial planning and analysis, automating some of the activities within the budgeting and forecasting space, management reporting, and even in the strategic planning space. So throughout the entire finance journey, there really is opportunity for us to do quite a lot. And I've tried to break it down into, the three main functional streams, process streams. So if we look at the procure to pay space, excuse me, especially looking at the manufacturing sector, supplier management is sometimes a lot more complex than it could be in other industries. In the manufacturing world, you tend to deal with a lot of suppliers, and they act or interact with you in different ways. In some cases, we still get documentation that is handwritten from some of our manufacturing customers, and processing that tends to be quite a burden on the finance departments. Something else that remains quite relevant, if we look at supplier master data management, automating the annual submission or request for submission of supplier documentation like BEE certificates can really drive down the burden that we place on our supplier or on our staff. On the invoice processing side, brilliant use case to optimize efficiencies and reduce human error. And my colleague Neil will take us through a use case or a case study of that in a bit. Discrepancies resolution. So if we look at matching up proof of delivery, ensuring that what we get invoiced for actually matches what was delivered. And in some cases, that could be a very tedious task, especially if you get high volumes of small parts or materials that you need to use in your manufacturing processes. And there's no need for that to necessarily remain a manual activity. In the order to cash space, some of the quite popular automations that we see and the value-adding ones tends to be around order creation, order generation. So, receiving purchase orders and automatically posting those orders and processing those orders, pulling through to the accounts receivable side. On the customer billing side, so creating or automatically creating the invoices out of the ERP and sending those off with statements so that we can get cash back into the business. And then at the end, really doing the reconciliations. So ensuring that we take bank statements and all our transactions, reconcile that, identify variances, and just handle exceptions through our personnel. On the record to report side, again, I'm looking at GL accounting. So looking at, manual GL entry processing, automating that, reconciliations, again, and some reporting lends itself extremely well. Intercompany accounting, again, if that's relevant to you, there's a lot of opportunity in that space. Through to the tax side, so looking at how do we do our tax master data management and annual monitoring. So those are just a few samples. I think there's a lot of use cases. What I would like to do now is just run through two of these. If we look at accounts receivable, I think it's a very valuable process to look at. And the reason for that, I worked with a specific organization where they had a complement of about 25 people that was just focused on managing this process from an administrative point of view. And by automating certain of these activities, they were able to reduce that team to only 5 people and reapply those other 15 professionals to other functions to alleviate some pressures on the other, in the other processes. So if we look at this example, starting at the receipt of a purchase order, that could be automatically monitored. And if purchase orders are sent through to a central mailbox, we can then pick that order up, automatically read the details of that order from the document, process the order, so essentially post that order into our systems. We don't need someone to recapture that. We can push that through to order fulfillment and start the accounts receivable workflow as well, which would result in automatic issuing of an invoice along with the necessary statement, and managing the collection process. Now, managing the collection process is always an interesting one. And it depends greatly on the way that your process is structured. But in a lot of cases, we tend to be very reactive in managing collections. An invoice gets sent out, and only if payment criteria or the agreed payment term is breached, do we start chasing down those payments and telling the customer that you haven't paid us yet, why are you breaching? What we can do if we automate is we actually preempt that. We automatically send reminders for payment through to our customer. And then, only when we get breaches in the payment criteria do we escalate that to a person to go and call the customer and understand why did we breach the payment date. Implementing simple measures like that could help us, optimize our cash position quite effectively. It also allows the accounts receivable clerks to rather engage in activities like negotiating potential early payment or early settlement discounts with customers, if that's your strategy, to bring that cash in a lot quicker. So that would be sample 1. The next one, if we look at another simple or interesting process, would be daily cash balance calculation and reconciliation. Now, the example that we have over here, essentially every step that we show can be automated, and it only needs to be touched by a person if any exceptions arise. So starting from the initiation side, we can download and consolidate our daily bank transactions and balances. And we can do all of that with an RPA bot. We can then download all cash transactions from our general ledger, again, using a bot that we define to do that. We can do our reconciliation, so compare the transactions and identify non-matching items. And typically, these non-matching items would be the exceptions that we still want a person to use some discretion on or action in some form or factor. And only if we find non-matching items would we really push that out and involve a person to resolve that. After that, we could add in all deposits and deposits in transit and deduct any outstanding, checks, a very American view there, but deduct any outstanding payments. After that, we can adjust for bank errors or service fees and interests that may not be there yet. And then we can go and identify cash or GL register errors and book the journal entries. And typically, these can be done to a large extent automatically as well. In most cases, we do find that automated posting there's still preference to get some human eyes on it before we process entirely automatic. But again, it takes away quite a burden by automating all of these activities and then only involving a person right at the end. And then at the end, we can validate the adjusted balances, again, automatically. We don't necessarily have to have a person do that. So in the end, something like daily cash balance calculation and reconciliation lends itself extremely well to automation from an end-to-end point of view. All right, so having gone through these two sample use cases, what I would like to do now is to hand over to Neil van Wijngaard to run us through a case study of accounts payable that we did within the manufacturing space for a customer. Neil, over to you.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. As Johan said, yes, I'm basically a solution architect working for iOCO. So I basically design a lot of these solutions that we implement, and I also run a team down in Cape Town that actually builds these things. And we also do it nationwide. So I just want to start off with a process model that we built for a particular customer. It's a straight-through processing model, but it's based on accounts payable. And on the right-hand side here, you'll have a bit of text to explain the different steps that we go through. But you'll see it's based on the concept of digitizing your accounts payable. So the idea is that we would have incoming email. So the idea is the vendor would send the invoice via email, or the supplier, if you would prefer that term, and we would receive that in an inbox. Once we've got the email in the inbox, we're then going to strip the attachments off the email, and we're going to store all the invoices to files. This we actually then took and we actually uploaded to SharePoint for archiving purposes, but you can do with that what you wish. Okay, we just did it because the customer at this particular point had an Office 365 subscription, and the additional benefit of storing it on SharePoint is that it automatically has a search and index component that will go and search and index the invoices, so it becomes easier to find the originals at a later stage. Okay. Then the magic happened. We then used an RPA platform called Automation Anywhere, and we'll talk a bit more about it shortly when I show you a video of how this whole thing works. And they've got a component called Iqbot that allows us to do some machine learning and AI, where it takes the invoice and it actually is capable of reading it and stripping out all the piece of information from the invoice so that we can actually get some raw data out the other side that we can work with. So the Iqbot would effectively process the invoices, get data out for us that we can then post into our accounting system. And this particular case, because it was a manufacturing client, they use an ERP system called Cispo, which is quite prevalent within South Africa for a lot of manufacturing clients. But this could have been any system. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it could have been Sage, ACPAC Sage, or you could have had SAP in here. It doesn't really matter. It's just an accounting system. And then we basically applied all the rules in here. So typically with accounts payable, you have to go and do a couple of checks. Is it a valid vendor? Is it a valid PO? Is there a goods received note attached to the PO or to the invoice? Do the numbers in the invoice tie up with what we already have in the ERP system as far as the PO is concerned, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole bunch of checks and balances that we then do. And then if the invoice passes all those rules, we then post an invoice into the ERP system. And then in the beginning, we also have unfortunately, we still live in a world where we have hard copies. So in your manufacturing world, people still drop off hard copies of the invoices, and then the staff have to scan it and then feed it into the inbox so we can push it through the system. So that still happens as well. I'll also be taking you through some lessons learned, because there are some things that you need to be aware of when you build these type of things. All right, so I'm going to take you through a bit of a video that I've put together just to illustrate all the technical bits and pieces without getting too involved in the whole bits and pieces. But just some of the technology that we touched upon to build this thing. As I said, the RPA platform that we use, Automation Anywhere. The ERP that we integrated into is Cispo. As I said, a lot of manufacturing customers use this particular ERP. We also have a SQL Server database engine where we store our databases. This is for us to do some data cleansing and cleanups, as well as keep a repository and an archive of everything we've done so that the auditors are happy. And then we also have Office 365 because we use Outlook and Excel. So Outlook to receive the mails, and we use Excel to manipulate CSV files from Iqbot to put it into the database. Okay. Inevitably, whenever you do RPA, there's always some version of Office involved somewhere. Okay. And then, of course, we have the Iqbot component from Automation Anywhere, and they've built, they've put a lot of effort into specifically invoice processing into the Iqbot because it's a very common process that happens right across the world. And they've got machine learning models in their cloud platform that learn from other customers and how they do things, so you gain the benefit of it. And it just makes life a lot easier if you can leverage off this platform. All right. So I'm going to just switch modes here quickly and then take you onto my laptop, and I'm going to show you this little video. Okay. Now, what you're seeing here in front of you is basically just a picture of an inbox, and I had to strip out a lot of data to make this POPI compliant. So all the people you see here are completely fictional. Okay. So we basically have attachments here. So there's an email coming in with an attachment, and you'll see there that the attachment there is a PDF, which is our preferred format. I'll talk later on about all the weird and wonderful things we've received in the past. Okay. But PDF is your preferred platform when you want to standardize on this, if you can. Okay. So there's an attachment coming in. And what the idea then is we write a bot to basically process all the invoices, all the emails, strip out all the attachments, and then dump them to a disk. All right. As I mentioned, we then upload that into SharePoint. The next step is the bot is going to upload all these invoices into a tool that we refer to as Iqbot, okay, which is part of the Automation Anywhere suite. And as I said, this is effectively a machine learning / AI component. So what it does is it automatically learns that you have hundreds of different invoices. It learns the pattern of each invoice from each customer. It remembers where all the fields are for each customer and where they store their data on their particular invoice. And as time goes on, it becomes more and more accurate in processing these invoices. So it's a machine learning model. So you'll see in this particular case, we're sitting at a 79% accuracy on processing invoices, including new ones coming through. And this is after doing about 7,000 documents and 11,000 pages. Okay. All right. So it takes a while, but eventually it gets there and it starts learning, and it keeps all the templates separately, and you can edit them and so forth. All right. So when an invoice comes through the first time, and this takes a bit of effort because this has to happen for each vendor, it takes you to a screen like this. Okay. So what we're going to do here is on the left-hand side, you'll see we're going to have a bunch of fields. These are the fields that we want to pull into our ERP system. This is the data that we need to post. And we also got the one-to-many because you can have multiple line items on an invoice. And then obviously you got the header section where you got the once-off data, like the PO number and the vendor code and so forth. And then you'll see it automatically. Let me just take this back. The video is a bit fast for my talking speed. Okay. So what actually happens on the right-hand side, it will give you an image of what the invoice looks like. Okay, so you'll see there's a PO number, there's a ship date, there, for example, see the delivery note coming in. I can see the different line items. So because of the machine learning and because it knows that this is an invoice, it will automatically map as many fields as it can for you. And we found in the past that it maps about 80% of the fields, and then some of them that can't read properly, and then you basically have to go and click on the field on the invoice and then map it to a field on the left-hand side. And you do the correlation like that. It also allows you to play with data types and build some rules and all kinds of things. And eventually you've mapped the entire invoice of that customer, and now it will remember it. Okay. So in the future, when you get a similar invoice from a similar customer, it's not going to ask you again. It's just going to process the invoice and strip it out. So it takes about a month for this maybe 2 months of invoices to settle this down. And then you've got most of them mapped. Okay. And then once it's gone through the Iqbot, what it does is it actually kicks out a CSV file, which is basically a text file that you can open up in Excel. And that is basically what it looks like. So it's basically raw data. It's got all the columns that I wanted from the Iqbot, and it's got the raw data sitting in there. And if I had multiple line items, there would be multiple line items sitting in here on the invoice. Okay. We just did a very simplistic one for the demo. Okay. All right, then the trick is I now want to import all of this into my database. So what I did is I created a SQL Server database to go and store this information. Now, just now I'm going to go through a slide where I'm going to talk about lessons learned. Okay. And we learned a lot of lessons here. And the core lesson here is vendors create crappy invoices. Okay. There's not one invoice that's the same. Sometimes the date PO is on there, sometimes the PO is not on there. The date formats are different. There's garbage inside the line items. The quality of the invoice is not good enough, etc., etc. The list carries on. Okay. And eventually what we did is we built a whole bunch of tables and wrote a whole bunch of what we refer to as stored procedures just to clean up the garbage that we got from the invoices. Okay. And this fixed part of the problem. And then the other part of the problem we had to sort out with interaction with the vendors. Okay. But I'll talk about that shortly. But there's a number of reasons this is important. It gives us the ability that if there's a failure in the system and you have to reboot everything and restart, that the bot knows where it left off and can carry on. It keeps an audit trail so we know what we've processed and what we haven't processed, so that we can give reports about what has been posted and what's outstanding. And it also gives peace of mind to all the auditors that we're not committing fraud because we have an audit trail. Okay. Because we're treating the bot as an employee. In other words, what did you do with the invoice? Okay. So it's a digital workforce, effectively. So we keep track records of everything we've done. Okay. All right. And then just to show you what a bot actually looks like, this is basically the interface into Automation Anywhere. And you'll see on the left-hand side, there's a whole bunch of tools that we have. Things from connecting to a database, to sending emails, to doing error handling, manipulating Excel, talking to CSV files, calling APIs, all kinds of stuff. And we drag and drop it onto this canvas in the middle, and we tie it together, and we build rules, and we set values. So as you can see, there's no coding involved. It's basically a matter of configuring it, but you have to have a plan. In other words, this is just a small snippet of what this looks like, but these things get quite complicated and hairy. Okay. But this is basically what a bot interface looks like when we actually build it. Okay. All right. And then, yeah, and then finally, what we're going to do is once you've built the bot, you can actually then start it. And this is how we test it. We actually check a bot deploys to your computer. And what it's going to do now is you'll see a bot running. So it's actually now going to log onto the Syspro ERP. So there it automatically launches Syspro. It logs in by itself. No human being required. It is now going to go and create a new invoice. And it's going to take the data that we stripped out of the Iqbot and put in the database. And it's going to post it into the ERP. Keeping in mind at this particular point, we've already done all the cross checks and balances. So we've actually checked that the POs are valid, the vendor code is valid, the GRNs are valid, the quantities are valid. And now the bot's just typing it into the interface. There it's checking up the GRN, it's matching the GRN values, and it's complete. And there you've just posted an invoice into your ERP. So at this particular point, you might have noticed that the actual manipulating ERP was only the last bit. The majority of the work actually took place before we even got there. Okay. All right, so now continue with my slides. that was the video. Okay. All right, so let's go take a look at some benefits that the customer got out of this, and then we'll take a look at some lessons learned. So the first benefit is we optimize the process between the vendors, the finance, and the stores. And you think this sounds strange, but before we started this, the finance department never really talked to the stores properly, and they never really talked to their vendors, except when there was a problem. After we were done, they knew the vendors by first name, and the stores and the finance department were actually visiting each other's homes for a braai, okay? Because they needed to talk to each other to get this process done, and the whole process actually changed significantly from where we started and where we finished, okay? So keep in mind, even though we're doing RPA, you're going to end up changing the way you work, okay? Once we've done that, we achieved about 80% of through processing. So only about 20% of the invoices are exceptions. And those are for various reasons. The 20% is normally people have a standing order that they can actually send an invoice before PO is raised, which sounds a bit weird, but it does happen in certain cases. And then we have some quality issues where people write invoices on cigarette packets and drop it off at the front desk. It still happens in the manufacturing industry. Not everybody's digital. We had a scenario where people went and bought an invoice book at the CNA, and then they wrote invoices handwritten. And then we got duplicate invoice numbers because the books at the CNA have the same number system every time you buy a new book. So yeah, you get some anomalies. So after this was done, the staff were redeployed to other tasks, and I'll talk about the change management that went through with this. But just keep in mind that sometimes the cost saving they have on this thing is not necessarily the fact that you don't have people doing the work anymore. You know, the people here were overwhelmed. The finance department weren't coping, and they were at the point where they had to employ more staff to get the work done. And now that they've actually automated, they can do the work with the existing amount of staff, and they don't have the additional expense of employing more people to do the work. So that's sometimes a hidden saving that people don't always realize. Benefits for the clients, you know, the vendors are getting their invoices paid super fast, you know, sometimes within 24 hours, because the bot is processing every 15 minutes. So the moment you email your invoice and there's no problems with it, it goes through the system very quickly, and you get your invoices paid faster. We're also enforcing rules quite rigidly. So no PO, no pay. No GON, no pay. Quantities don't match, no pay. You know, sometimes you can sneak these things past people. A bot doesn't care who you are. You know, you either conform to the rules or you don't. Okay. And then everybody's talking digitization lately. And if you think about this, this is part of a digitization journey. You've just taken your manual accounts payable process and you've digitized it. Okay, you've automated it. And because the RPA platform is all in the cloud, built on a SaaS model, you've effectively part of your cloud journey as well. So you don't have additional servers on premise you have to maintain or build. So there's no additional overhead in your IT. So yeah, so there you've got digitalization and cloud migration included in this whole process. All right, some lessons learned. Okay. Whenever you talk to the accounts department, you say, where do we start? They say, yeah, let's start with AP. It's such a simple process. It's going to be quick, 2 weeks, and we're done. Okay. AP is not simple. Okay. And the reason it's not simple is because of the following. The quality of the invoices that you receive from the vendors cause a lot of problems. Now, quite often people don't even have a PO on the invoice. They don't have a good receipt note on it. They don't have a proper invoice number. The vendor code or the vendor name is not even registered on the ERP system. All kinds of inconsistencies. And the reason they get away with this for a period of time is because the accounts department just sort of know who the person is, and they sort of let them get away with it and stuff like that. But when you digitize, if that information is not on the invoice, I can't help you. Okay. Then date formats are different. You won't believe how many different date formats there are. And you have to transpose from the date they've got in the invoice to the date that you want in the ERP system. Garbage inside the invoice fields. People will put units of measure in there. They'll put rand R symbols in there. They'll put all kinds of weird things in there. Incompatible file formats. People will send you the invoices in TIFF formats or in Excel spreadsheets. It's not even proper PDFs that come from an accounting system. Quality of the scans. Sometimes people, the vendors, they print the invoice and then they go and scan it before they mail it to you, and then the quality of the scanner is so bad that the time we get the invoice, we can't read it because it's too pixelated. Or they send you 100 invoices in one email. In the manufacturing industry, apparently they send a lot of invoices. So we had to cater for that and then create loops to go through one email and strip off hundreds of attachments and deal with them. And sometimes the invoices were just so bad that we had to contact the vendors directly and say to them, look here, Mr. Vendor, if you want to get paid, you have to play with us because we're busy digitizing and you need to make your invoice quality a bit better. And strangely enough, when you talk to them like that, they're quite keen to assist you. And then they change the invoices, and then the next month it goes better. And then after a couple of months, then everybody's on board, and most of your vendors have altered their invoices to be better and more accommodating. We did pick up some change management issues with our accounting staff. This is specifically with the admin staff that used to capture the invoices into the accounting system. I think in the beginning they thought this was going to fail and they started laughing at us until it actually started working. Then they started getting nervous because management didn't tell them what their new job's going to be after the bot starts doing this. I actually had a scenario where they started chasing the bot. We were only processing in the morning at 6, at midday at 12, and at night at 6, and then in the hours in between, they started capturing invoices manually so that the bot doesn't do it, to try and, prove their worth. And that just skewed the numbers. So eventually I just changed the bot to run every 15 minutes, and then they couldn't keep up. Okay. But they did raise the concern with management, and then management realized, my goodness, we need to talk to our staff here. And they basically explained to them that they need to now communicate with the vendors and explain to them that they need to change the invoice formats and build relationships with the vendors, and that they will get paid faster and so forth. So the admin staff that just sat there capturing invoices day in and day out now became change management agents within the business, and they started communicating with their vendors and building relationships. Okay, so their jobs changed completely, and it took a bit of management to make them see that. But today they're super happy, and if you had to switch the bot off and they had to go back to capturing invoices manually, they'd be seriously upset, I think. And of course, we had some challenges between the finance and the stores, because the stores receive the goods and they have to go and capture the GRNs into the ERP system, and the GRNs has to match the POs and the invoices, and quite often they either don't do it, or they do it incorrectly, or they do it too late, and that whole process had to be sorted out internally as well. All right, so those are just some of the lessons learned. As I said, that was the harder part than actually building the technology at the end of the day. And then after we finished all accounts payable, we realized there's actually a whole bunch of other stuff that we probably can go and automate as well to make this process even better. So we picked up that there's problems with the GRN receipting. We can probably go automate some of that. One of the problems with invoices is quite often you need authorization. So a vendor sends you an invoice and you ask yourself, now, why must I pay this? Who authorized this? And you actually need a bit of a workflow process within the organization to get invoice authorization before you pay. So that can be added onto this. Obviously, you've got credit and debit notes go backwards and forwards. We can put that into this. Quite often you get statements. Well, most of the time you get statements with your invoices. So one statement, multiple invoices. So you might want to process your statements to go and check that you've covered all the invoices and let them and vice versa. So as a cross check. And even though we have some reporting from our database to tell people where we are, you can actually make that better. Go and build some Power BI dashboards and go and put it on a SharePoint Office 365 interface and have some real-time analytics on top of this. So Automation Anywhere has got that built in, but it just reports what the bot's doing and how often it runs, but it doesn't tell you about the data that the bot's actually manipulating. So that's quite a separate analytical dashboard type of scenario. And that's basically our case study.
Okay, cool. So we're going to get to the questions. As you guys were talking, there were a whole host of questions coming through. Neil, let's go with you because I think some of these questions actually relate to your demonstration and your case study. Sure. This question says, at times you find that a customer ends up having duplicate invoice numbers because of data cleanup not being managed properly. What are the measures to ensure that the correct invoice is selected?
Okay, so typically if you have a duplicate invoice coming through, it normally happens the first invoice comes through, you go and capture it into the ERP, and when the second invoice comes through with a duplicate invoice, the second one will be rejected. Okay, it comes down to whether the invoice was posted or not. If it's been posted, then you're going to have to do a credit or a debit note. If it hasn't been posted yet, you could potentially cancel it and then basically pick up the second invoice. But it is a difficult one. So typically what we did is we pushed them all through the Iqbot, we recorded them to the database, and we tried to prevent duplicates from happening at that stage. So if they happen quickly enough before the bot processes them into the ERP, you could potentially filter them out. So a scenario would be if I process, for example, at 6 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 6 o'clock at night, and I have a 6-hour gap in between, and somebody sent through an invoice with incorrect values and then sent another one with the same invoice number, you could potentially pick it up before you post. If you run the bot every 15 minutes, you're not going to catch it in time. Okay, so it becomes a timing issue. But you are going to have them, and then we're going to kick them out normally as anomalies that the account department needs to deal with.
Okay, Neil, I've got another one that I'm going to direct at you. It says here, is the assumption that vendors will be able to adjust their formats to customers' requirements? Is there no way that tech through things like OCR and image recognition can deal with that challenge?
Yeah, we have dealt with majority of them. So first prize is we're doing OCR in the Iqbot. So the Iqbot does OCR. We pick it up. We build a platitude of rules to scrub the data, clean it up, make a certain logical assumptions, build rules, and everything else. So by doing that, we could process a lot of the invoices. I'd say probably about 60% of them. But from the other 40%, they were things that you can't bypass. In other words, were things they literally didn't add a PO to the invoice. And if you don't add PO, I can't process it. Or they didn't actually, one of the rules with manufacturing is goods received notes, GRNs. They didn't send through the GRN. Okay, it's nothing to do with the format itself. It's got to do with the data that's on the invoice. So in that case, you literally have to contact the vendor and say to him, Mr. Vendor, please put your PO on your invoice and please put your GRN on the invoice. Otherwise, we can't process. So it wasn't a technology problem so much as it was a lack of data on the invoice. That was the problem that we had to contact the vendors about.
Okay. Johan, do you want to take this one? It says, what are the main barriers to adoption of automation, specifically within the finance function, and how do you overcome this?
So I would say you're probably dealing with two main barriers to adoption. I think the first one is, as Neil explained, that fear factor of being replaced. If you don't communicate the benefit of automation effectively to your staff, you get quite a lot of resistance, through fear of losing value or losing their jobs, or not understanding where where the job will be turned to. I think the second one is, finance professionals tend to be structured, and they tend to enjoy set processes and rules. And what typically happens is when you start automating, you start bringing change into the function as well. So again, change management around, educating or communicating the benefits of automation and the fact that change is actually a good thing, that have served us well. So I think those are the two main ones that I see. So it's more, I wouldn't say technological challenges, more change management related in nature.
Okay, so in this particular one, we're talking RPA for finance in manufacturing. Is there scope to have RPA for finance in other industries or sectors?
Definitely, yes. So I think the benefits and the focus might be slightly tweaked, but yes, finance as a function across all industries lends itself extremely well to automation, and it builds a very strong business case because the benefits are significant.
Okay, cool. So while we're on that, I'm curious to know, what should you be looking for within an organization, or what kind of conversations should you be having with your team before we start saying, okay, we're going to go the RPA route? What discussions should be at least ironed out, or you should be thinking about as an organization?
So that's always an interesting one. So I think, to start off with, I would say, educate your team around the potential value that they can add if we start taking away some of these frustrating and repetitive activities from them, giving them the opportunity to also dream a bit about the value that they can add. How can they further their careers and reach out a bit wider? So, a bit of education in that space. The second part would be that, when it comes to automation, there's two parts to it. So the first one is digitizing and automating a process, but the second one is really reinventing your processes or rethinking your processes to even further optimize. And I think it's important to start thinking about what is the art of the possible if we use technology instead of people to do these things, and how can we better the organization by doing it that way.
Okay, we've just got about a couple of minutes left. The other question that came in, and perhaps Johan, you can share from your experience dealing with other companies. It says here, how are companies communicating RPA rollouts?
Sure, it's actually an interesting one.
Maybe I can help with this one.
Sure.
Yeah. Quite often what they do is they actually create a letter that they send to all their vendors. And in this letter, they state that they're busy with a digitization journey, they're busy digitizing the AP process, and then they ask their vendors to comply with a number of things. So in this document, they state, could you please ensure that all your invoices are PDFs? Please make sure that there's a PO on the invoice. Please make sure that your quality of your invoice is 300 DPI, etc., etc. So it's basically a 1 or 2 page document that you send to all your vendors and just say to them, look here, we are busy with this digitization strategy. I'm sure that you will be shortly as well, whether you're doing it through AR or AP. Please assist us with this and we'll assist you. And this will be to your benefit because you'll get your invoices paid faster.
All right, so we've got less than a minute. I just want to know, are you guys open to sharing your email addresses in case there are participants who want to take the conversation a little bit further? If so, that would be great if you could type it onto the chat screen while we wrap up the session. And as you do that, one quick question, hopefully we can give it a little 30 seconds to answer. Neil, you want to take this one. Are there any challenges to implementing the system on a technical side outside of employees resisting?
Okay, the model that we followed here, as we said, we use the Automation Anywhere platform. It's all cloud-based. So there is no technical problems in setting up your server environment, because I've tried to build an on-prem server structure. It is possible, but extremely complicated and very difficult to maintain. So it's better to go with the cloud platform. That takes a lot of complexity out of it. Then the only complexity you have left is you have to change some firewall rules to make sure that you can access it from your network onto the cloud properly. And you just need to make sure that you always have internet access.
All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining in. Neil and Johan have left their contact details in the chat facility. So if you want to reach out to them after the session, you can do so. Remember, the video will be shared with you after the recording has stopped. Thank you so much for joining us, and goodbye.
Cool. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.